Welcome, Baptist Communicators, to Fall Forum 2023. I am Marilyn Stewart, and I'm happy to serve as your president this year. I also am the senior editor for publications and news at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. This morning I have with me Brandon Elrod. He is a public relations consultant for the North American Mission Board. Good morning, Brandon.
Hey, good morning. I'm definitely excited about the Fall Forum. As you can probably see, I'm really embracing the fall part of the Fall Forum. I've got my sweater vest, I've got some plaid. I'm just ready to go for the Fall Forum this year. And here's
that's because you're in Georgia and you have fall. We're in New Orleans and nothing changes.
Exactly. I was going to ask you, the temperatures dropped like maybe 1 or 2 degrees, and now it's time for fall?
1, maybe 2. Yes,
Yeah.
That's correct.
It's one of the things when I was living in New Orleans, going to seminary there, one of the things that I knew, you only know that it's fall when the Starbucks started selling the pumpkin spice latte. That was the only way you knew it was fall.
Exactly. But you could always count on that reminder.
Exactly.
Well, Brandon, you have been the program person for this particular forum. You have done a great job. We're very thankful for that, but you get all the credit for this year's lineup of speakers and some very interesting topics.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely excited and was honored to have the opportunity. It's just been a great experience to get to work with the different people that we're going to have on the Fall Forum this year, and they really have brought their A game for these different topics. One of the things that's just fascinating about what they're really going to be talking about is basically what the future of communications in Baptist life is really going to look like. They're going to address, we're going to see a lot of the challenges, and they're going to bring some great solutions to the table in the face of those challenges as well. And so I'm just excited that we all get to learn from them together.
Well, this is going to be a great lineup, and I do want to say one thing to all of our watchers, that you will enjoy today's program, but be sure to stop and listen at the very end. Immediately following this will be our Student Award program, and this is a very important part of BCA, our competition, and it's not everything that BCA is about, but the competition does a lot of good things for us. It takes some courage to turn in something that you've put your heart into and to get some feedback, but it helps you grow. And it helps you reach those goals that you want to reach as a communicator. So I commend all of our students who have made submissions, and this will be an enjoyable part of it, and we want to help you reach those goals. And the second part of BCA that has been extremely helpful, I think, to all of us are programs like today, and then the relationships that we develop that encourage us and help us do better at our job.
Absolutely, could not agree more. And as we look to this first presentation, one of the things that we know is this is someone, Amy Whitfield, is no stranger to many of the people watching this. And she's been just an excellent and regular person in Southern Baptist life and communications. And so now she is taken on a role in the last couple of years of serving as a communications director at a local church. And she'll kind of tell a little bit more of that in her presentation. But one of the reasons I wanted to invite her on was that she could talk to us about the importance and the value of people who are at state level, national level, and just the value of interacting with churches, and especially making some of these connections with church communications directors. And so just really, really looking forward to her presentation, and take it away, Amy.
Hey, all my friends in BCA. I'm so excited to get to participate in the Fall Forum this year. It's been a little while since we were together for Spring Workshop, but so fun that we get to have these other avenues to connect and learn from one another. So I want to talk today about being better together, storytelling and cooperation. And what I really want to focus on is bridging the gap between denominational communicators and church communicators. A lot of the folks in BCA, a lot of our members really focus in the denominational communication area, whether it's as an entity or an entity at the state level, or a Southern Baptist entity at the national level, or maybe doing working in news media at one of our state papers, Baptist Press, something like that. And that's all kind of focusing on the bigger picture. But we do have this whole kind of field that's really opening up in church communications, which is what I do. So my name is Amy Whitfield. I serve as the Executive Director of Communications at the Summit Church in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. And I love what I do. I've been in this role for just over 2 years. It is great and wonderful. But before that, all I ever did was denominational communications. I've worked in Southern Baptist entities. I did that for 20 years in some other areas, administration and things like that. But I was the director of communications at Southeastern Seminary for several years, and then I was the associate vice president for convention communications at the SBC Executive Committee. So most of my experience before doing this was on sort of the other side of this, and now I've gotten a couple of years at the local church level, and it's taught me a lot about sort of similarities, differences, ways that that the work really overlaps, but also kind of some new things, and how important it can be for us to learn how to connect and work together. So first of all, I want to just think through what it really is, what kind of this field is. There has been a real uptick in the last several years in church communications as a department, and church communications directors like me. Larger churches have had them for some time. Daryl Girardier, that was at the spring workshop, he has been at Brentwood Baptist Church for some time. Even before I was in this role at the Summit, there were people in either creative director or communications director, things like that. So they've been around a while, and even before that, there were media ministers. But it's something that has kind of evolved over time into structures that are almost similar to what many of you might have on your teams. That we have people, we have designers, we have video production, we have writers, we have all, social media managers, things like that. So a lot of our departments are very similar to the ones that some of you might work in. Now, medium-sized churches are starting to add communications directors to their church staff because of the increase in delivery platforms. It used to be that you didn't have to have a communications person at a church because there really were only a few different ways to communicate your message. If you were trying to get information out about an event, or if you were trying to kind of galvanize the church around something, there were pretty much, I can really think of 3 primary ways. One was from the stage or from the pulpit, that the pastor or maybe a ministry director would stand up and give an announcement, tell about something that was happening. The second one was the church bulletin. That was very important and always available in the back, or sometimes put, in the back of the seats and in the back of the pews. And the third one was the church sign. You pretty much, that's all you had to do was to get those pieces out. And so you didn't really have to have someone that was over communications. Now everything is different. The people are on social media, slides are used everywhere. Church bulletins are not happening in the same ways anymore. And then especially even after COVID, I think probably happened even less. And so there are just so many avenues, so many platforms. So a lot of medium-sized churches are beginning to add, but they don't necessarily have the ability to have full departments full of designers and all these different communications professionals. So a lot of times you see one person doing everything. Maybe they contract, maybe they have a team of volunteers, but they're trying to juggle all of it and figure out. And then small churches are just trying to figure out how to operate in a world that has all these new delivery platforms. They may not be able to have a communications person, but they are trying to learn how to navigate communications things, whether it's through a committee or a volunteer or something like that. So this is definitely something that is building and growing, and it is a field that, conferences are happening now, books are being written about church communications, and so it is an entire professional area. But I've learned a few similarities and some differences between what I used to do and what I do now. Similarities, the job is a lot the same. I still have deadlines. I still have to think about all the different avenues, print, digital, video, social media, all of these pieces that I was thinking about when I was at Southeastern or when I was at the executive committee. I'm thinking about them now at the summit. So I definitely have to do a lot of the same things and use a lot of the same tools. I've also learned that people in church communications, I mean, they love all of the same things that we do. They're interested in new technology. They're interested in developing and growing. So many of them come from similar backgrounds, whether it is in a professional area like design, or they majored in communications or public relations or marketing, or they're like me and majored in, I majored in politics, and so you have people that English backgrounds, things like that. So love a lot of the same things. Some folks came from the journalism world, but they are now using what they love and they're doing it for the church. So there's a lot of similarities and overlap, things that building networks together really would be a benefit for. The third thing is that professional development is just as important to church communicators as it is to denominational communicators. Changing platforms and a changing landscape, it affects churches just as much as it does entities. And so everyone needs to grow. I mean, churches are all having conversations about what AI means, and not just for this conversation, that's out there about what does it mean for pastors and preaching and making sure that that it doesn't, get used in the wrong way. It also, artificial intelligence is also a big conversation for church communicators as they're developing things, knowing that, so many tools are now powered by it, trying to learn how it works, learn what applies. It's a lot of the same questions that you're asking. So getting to be connected and get professional development can mean just as much to someone sitting in my seat. And then also just recognizing that we all have the same big mission together. We're all about the Great Commission, and we have our own specific mission assignments. When I was at Southeastern, we were focused on students and on what students were doing and helping to prepare them to serve the church and fulfill the Great Commission. When I was at the executive committee, I was focused on how what we do would serve the messengers. And now I'm part of helping create a movement of disciple-making disciples in RDU and around the world. And so we're all part of the same big mission, but we have sort of our specific mission assignments. And so there's a real connection, a real heartbeat that does overlap when I'm talking with some of you, that even though I may be dealing with different things, we're really all after the same big thing and wanting to cooperate together with one another. So those are kind of similarities. Let's think about the differences. One huge difference is that my rhythm is not at all what it used to be. It used to be that I went on a semester to semester rhythm, and summers being really quiet and times to regroup and things like that in a school. Then I went to the executive committee, where all of my work went from board meeting to board meeting and really annual meeting to annual meeting. And so everything is kind of built around these large events. Or in the kind of on the news side of things, the cycle is sort of day to day, right? It's based on deadline, or if you're working on a magazine, it's month to month. In my world, it is week to week, Sunday to Sunday. So everything is kind of building up to the weekend service. And some of that is about the service itself, right? But it's also about what we need to tell people at that service, what slides need to be there, what videos need to be going, what social media support needs to be given with what we are sharing, when certain registrations are opening up, and how we need to make sure that our church members know about it. And so I have learned it is, just like many of you who have served in local church ministry or volunteer, it doesn't stop. 52 weeks out of the year, you're just moving from one thing to one thing. Now, you may have a big event. Christmas is a huge thing on our radar right now that we are building up to. And obviously in the spring, Easter becomes that. So you kind of have the big pieces. We call them big rocks in our world. But it's a very regular rhythm along with these sort of large things along the way. So that rhythm has shifted. My audiences are very different now. They used to be bigger. It used to be 47,000 churches or 10,000 messengers. It was, a kind of a very specific, larger geographic audience, things like that. This is very different. I really consider that I have 4 audiences that I focus on. One is our staff. We do have a large staff, and I've learned, especially with multi-campuses, with multi-site systems, we have multiple campuses, how important it is to make sure that our staff is aware of what is happening before we, roll something out to the church. So I've had to make sure that that's a step because, none of our staff needs to feel like they're in a position to where they are asked about something and their answer is, I don't know. So I have to always remember that's my first audience to make sure they are fully informed. My second audience is church-wide. And so making sure that we get all the information out that our church members need to know about whatever is happening, whatever we need to inform them of. My third audience is external in an outreach sense, the community around us, the people we want to reach, the people we want to come into our doors and to hear the gospel, the community partners that we're working with to try to serve the area. So kind of the RDU area. And then ultimately, sort of the bigger message, which is where a lot of times we want to partner with denominational groups, with folks to tell stories of what God is doing here with and for our partners. We know that we are seeking to be better together with within the cooperative system. We want to serve with other churches. We think we can do more together than we can do apart. So we want to tell about what's happening here so that we can share that and celebrate it together. So we have kind of that larger external audience. It's just different than the large one that I used to be thinking through. This is one to basically share with others. So that's kind of a different thing. I've had to think through my audiences. Crisis management is very different because it's on a just a different scale, but it's much more personal. I mean, I have the things that we will deal with will be more up close, and but we still are trying to handle things in the very best way possible. And so sometimes it still benefits from me to learn from others and to be connected with other people as we learn sort of best practices in that area. It also is very different because I'm so much closer to the constituents that I deal with. Our relationship is deeper. Trust becomes much more important. When I was in a role where I was putting, helping to put a message out that's maybe is going to a much wider audience, but I'm not actually encountering them. That's very different than a message that's going out to someone that then when our service is over, I'm going to stand up and my constituents are right there. They're in the room with me. And so I'm getting to know them, and it actually helps me. I visit a lot of our different campuses so that I can see and experience how messages land and make sure that we are sharing something that connects with all of our people, and that makes sense to them, recognizing we're over an entire region. So it is a much closer work. Now one thing that can happen though, and is a very different, and this may depend, it's not quite the case for me, but it can depend, especially as I mentioned before with some of our medium-sized or smaller churches, is that a communication staff is often much smaller and there is less access for help. People don't really know where to go and they don't have the networks. So that's where I kind of want to talk about what BCA can be or other relationships. is that there really is a desire to work with other partners and to know other people. Our churches all know that we're all part of a bigger story, right? We work together because we believe we can do more together than we can do apart. So we want to partner with others. But with such a large network of churches, it can be hard to connect or even know where to start. It's very different for me because I know so many of you and have worked with so many of you. So I have a lot of your contact information at the ready. I know exactly who to ask. We'll have somebody that on our staff that'll come and need something, and I'll think, oh, I know the right person to reach out to at that organization. But most people don't have that. They don't have the benefit of the history that I have, or the networks that came from me being in the world. And so I think it's important to figure out how to bridge that gap. Churches need to be able to get help and advice from professionals who interact with other churches. Denominational professionals can really help because you are getting to see how different churches deal with things and do things. You get exposure. And then also denominational storytellers can get help telling your stories from people on the ground who understand the goal and the purpose. A lot of times when I was kind of on the other side of this, and I would maybe reach out to a church to want to tell the story, of something that was going on, it's a very different experience if I work with someone who knows communications, knows and understands the language, knows how to send whatever assets, knows how to make all the right connections. And so now that this is a growing field, there are more opportunities. The more we build these networks, more opportunities for people at the organizational level to be able to connect with someone on the ground that can help in telling the story of the church or the event that you're talking about. Church communicators want to tell. We want to tell our stories. We want to find common ground with other churches and with the cooperative entities that are really helping kind of extend our resources, extend our mission. And so we want to work together in being able to share and celebrate what God is doing. So thinking about some ways to sort of bridge that gap. Like I said, it's pretty easy for me because of, that when I came into this role, I brought my networks with me. And so I know who to call. But many church communications leaders don't know who to contact. So some of the things that we, can do or can think about is, finding ways in your area to deliver workshops or opportunities for relationship. That can come at like state convention events. There are often networking opportunities for various groups of people. I think there can be networking opportunities for communications groups or breakout sessions for communications directors, and not just at organizations, but also at churches. And that's a way for people to connect with one another. It's been great for me to begin connecting with other communications directors in my area. Even one of our, BCA members, Bobby Puffenberger, is I just learned is now a communications director at a sister church here. And so we have that ability to connect with one another, to help each other. I have some other colleagues in the area as well. And so finding opportunities through state conventions, local associations, I think can be really a great thing. Obviously, other fellowships that we have done at the SBC annual meeting, things like that, these are ways to build connections. I think it's also helpful to make it easy for church communicators to find help. I often learned this when I was on the other side, and a lot of times churches did need assistance. And so we would provide that if someone needed some guidance. So making it really easy for people to reach out, whether it's on a website or another place, but putting out there that there are opportunities for connections, networking, for helping one another. I remember several years ago, Southeastern was part of sponsoring an event that I think along maybe with Lifeway in the area, Lifeway in North Carolina Baptist. It was a long time ago, but we were at a church that was centrally located, and it had a lot of workshops on many things. And they just wanted to kind of just toss out as a possibility doing a communications workshop. So we did one on storytelling, maybe on, I think it was on branding, and the room was packed. So you had other sessions on preaching, on, small group ministry things, but we had one on branding, and the room was packed in several cases with small churches that didn't exactly know how to put together a cohesive brand. And so they wanted to learn. And I was so surprised at the response. And then now being on this side, realizing how important I think that can be. So finding ways and opportunities to deliver professional development, but not just that. And that's a way for them, for people to meet one another and for people to meet you. So I think that's great as well. For churches that are too small to have a full-time communications director, just helping your leaders know that when churches call them for help in something, sometimes their problem signals a need for a communications professional, and you could possibly help in that way, even down to just knowing if something needs to go out, if they're dealing with a crisis, what are some of the best delivery methods, things like that. I'm very excited that our family of Baptist communicators is growing, and that means more opportunities for cooperation. Telling the story is a vital part of the Great Commission, and it's my hope that as we know each other more, we can all be better together. And I hope that we can begin building even more bridges and more opportunities for us to connect with one another. Thanks. Hope you guys are enjoying the Fall Forum, and have a great day.
Amy is just a great communicator. I really enjoyed that part that she mentioned. And times have changed. One of my very earliest writing assignments was for a church, and they ran it off on a mimeograph, and so that's going back a ways. But this is a very interesting new field. What did you take away from that session and what she had to say?
Yeah, one of the most valuable things from what she brought to the table was just recognizing that so many different avenues for communication have opened up to local churches. I mean, it's one of the things that happened from COVID. You can go and find even some of the most rural churches in America, and you'll find that they're live streaming their services, and it doesn't take a whole lot of technology for them to be able to do that. So there's just so many different avenues for the local church to use to connect with their people. And one of the things that we should be doing as communicators is helping to tell all those stories that are coming out of all these different avenues and these different channels. The opportunities are basically endless, and it's really, really important that I think that we work together and do more to make those connections and foster those relationships.
It is an exciting time, and she mentioned in crisis management the word trust. And I think that's very important to all communicators. And we all know that trust begins with personal integrity, but there is a professional trust that we have to develop. And that comes from communicating well, getting quotes correct, passing those on correctly in the right context to those we serve. And so it is an important time. And I do feel like this will be a source of stories, and in a way that we can help each other grow as writers and communicators.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that Amy mentioned is that the audiences are very different if you're writing for a local congregation or if you're writing for state and national audiences. But I thought it was very interesting that she pointed out that they're interested in the same thing. And I think that's fascinating in a lot of ways. The stories that appeal to us at the state level would appeal to them. They're going to be a source of many stories that maybe we can work together in ways and follow up on what they're doing in the local churches. So I do think it's going to be an exciting time to see how this begins. And especially since, as she said, this is not just larger churches, the small churches feel the need to communicate well with their people.
Right. Yeah, one of those things a lot of smaller churches need, or a lot of times they need that helpful hand from outside who can help them figure out how to do some of those different forms of communication. So, I mean, one of the things we can always do is try to make ourselves, make the BCA potentially available to churches who could use some assistance. So I think that's just a lot of really great info.
A lot of great things ahead.
So for our next segment, we've got a conversation between myself and Trevin Wax. Trevin is Vice President of Research and Resource Development here at the North American Mission Board. And if you have been engaged or involved in Southern Baptist life for very long, Trevin's name is not a stranger to you. He has been just around for a long time and worked at Lifeway for several years, developing curriculum and all manner of resources and books and columns. He's prolific in what he produces and the way that he thinks and helps us to engage in the issues that we're facing today as Southern Baptists. And so I'm really, really looking forward to sharing this conversation between myself and Trevin. All right, we're here with Trevin Wax, who is Vice President of Research and Resource Development here at the North American Mission Board. If you know Trevin, you know he's no stranger to Southern Baptists. He has been around our tribe for a very long time, producing a lot of great resources. And the funny thing is, if I say that, it makes him sound old, and he is not, which just goes to show you just the incredible output and the incredible work that he's done just as a thought leader, theologian in our tribe. And so he's an author. He's written many books. One of the most recent ones, The Thrill of Orthodoxy, just a really valuable resource for this day and age. And so he's also produced a bunch of other resources that are just really, really helpful for your devotional life, spiritual life. And here at NAM, he really helps to try to equip churches in the role of fulfilling the Great Commission. So he produces all manner of resources, oversees that entire department here for us, and it's just been a privilege over the last couple of years to get to know him. And so I'm excited to kind of let him step in and share some of his wisdom with you all, and just welcome Trevin.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Brandon. Excited to be here and excited to talk with the group.
Yeah, you're very welcome. We're honored to have you. And so one of the projects that you have been working on here in the last couple of years, you've been putting together this podcast that if our audience, if you've not seen this yet, it's called Reconstructing Faith. It's I think it's a great resource for just helping us as a tribe, us as Christians here in the States, navigate some of the things and the challenges that we've been facing. And one of the things that it just kind of jumps right into all of those issues and tries to help believers, help churches figure out how to move forward. And so that's going to be one of the main topics of what we're talking about today. And so one of the things I just want to jump right in and say that it's really no secret that evangelicals and in particular Southern Baptists have endured kind of our own fair share of scandal and just challenges, all manner of things in the last 5+ years, as is the entire culture that we live in. And so one of the things, just want to jump in and say, for the church to move forward, how important is it for us to rightly address some of these challenges and to really deal with them honestly? And what does it look like to have courage in the face of this season?
Well, I think when we're looking at the overall state of the church, as we look over the landscape of evangelicalism and even just at ourselves as Southern Baptists, I liken it to like homes after a flood has come through. If you've ever done disaster relief, you know what it's like when you've got a house because some amount of water got into the house, and it means you got to, maybe take the floor down to the studs, or you've got to get some of the mold and rot out of some of the rooms, and you got to, bust through the sheetrock, and there's all sorts of stuff that's got to happen when you have a situation like that. And I feel like with the church today, in any number of areas. We've had some rooms in the house that have rot in them, and it's caused challenges for our witness, for our credibility. We whether we like it or not, we are connected to other Christians, and so problems in other parts of Christianity do affect us, whether we like to think so or not. I remember back in the mid 2000, like early 2000s, when the Catholic Church abuse scandals were happening. I remember Southern Baptist pastors and church leaders saying things like, "Well, it's because they have priestly celibacy. Everyone realizes the Catholics got a really big problem there. Thank goodness we don't have that, in our circles." And I remember just thinking, even back then, I was like, how do we know we don't have a problem? And what if, maybe the problem is different, but even if we hadn't, the church overall took a big hit because of some of the egregious evils that happened in other denominations, even before some of the rot got exposed in our own. So I think we've got to ask questions about credibility, not because we care to get the world's approval, but because we want Jesus to be magnified, and the church is a reflection of Jesus, and we ought to care how we're seen because we want Jesus to be glorified, to receive glory. So I think we've got to care, number one, and I think we've got to look the challenges directly in the eye, not avert our attention from them. But to do so in a way that we have the perspective of, the church throughout history and the church around the world. That I'm really burdened about that, because I feel like some of the challenges we face can feel overwhelming. But if you've got the perspective of church history and you realize there have been a lot of scandals and evils and egregious errors that the church has made over the years, and there've been dark times and there's been declining times, and then there have been times of revival and awakening and God doing amazing things in the midst of the darkness. And so I feel like we need that perspective of the past, and then we also need the perspective of brothers and sisters in other parts of the world where their challenges aren't the same ones as ours. So they may be able to help us in some areas, we can help them in some areas, and then you get that brother sister family dynamic where we can strengthen each other. So I mean, we've got our work cut out for us. I think the next 50 years is largely going to be a task of rebuilding the witness of the church in a number of different areas, not just one, not just sex abuse and stuff, but in a number of places where our walk corporately hasn't lined up with our talk. And so my the counsel I'm giving to Christians is to say, the church is going to be here 50 years from now. What do you want it to look like? What should it look like? What does God want it to look like? And let's roll up our sleeves and put on the gloves and get busy at, getting the rod out and fortifying the foundations and moving forward in faith, not fear.
That's one of my favorite metaphors that you use kind of early on in the first season of the podcast, is talking about removing the rot, but not destroying the foundations. I mean, that's a lot of times when you see people trying to remove the rot, there is a temptation from some quarters of our world that want to also take out the foundations. And so how important are those foundations? How important is it that we make sure that we not, in our quest to remove the rot, that we don't disturb the foundations?
Yeah, this is really important, because unfortunately, one of the things that's happening right now is you've got people basically, and I think people listening need to ask the question, which way do you incline? Because everybody's got an inclination to one of two possible errors. The conservative tendency is to say, I want to protect the reputation of the church as much as possible, to the point that we may ignore the rot, or we may be like, well, I mean, it's silly when you think about it, but it's kind of like, nobody, if they've got rot in one of the rooms of their homes, says, oh, well, but it's just that room. All these other rooms are great, or at least we don't have as much rot as the house down the street, like no one talks like that. If you've got a problem, if you've got mold, you got to deal with it. But it is easy at times because we don't want to hurt the reputation of the church more, to shy away from transparency And to really, the conservative inclination at times is to defend the indefensible. That's what we've seen happen over and over again, and it usually happens with good intentions. Like people, nobody decides I'm going to be part of a cover up or not, be part of. I don't want to be transparent. That's not how people's minds and hearts operate. Generally, it's I want to preserve the institution or preserve a reputation or do whatever I take. And so we wind up defending the indefensible or minimizing the seriousness of some of these problems out of a love for the church, but that winds up, actually doing more damage to the church. But on the other side of that, those that would call themselves more progressives or whatnot, you do have this tendency nowadays to want to purge the church and to blow up what I call the foundational pillars, to say, oh, purity culture, really was bad for a lot of people. And so instead of like digging deeper to the foundations of what does the Bible actually teach about purity, rather than sort of the prosperity gospel tinged purity culture that came out in the 90s, you just kind of throw out the whole question of purity altogether to say Christian teaching on sexuality or is harmful or is this or that. Or sex abuse only happens because of complementarianism, which isn't true, but whatever it might be, you wind up with some of these areas where you're actually blowing up the house, not just removing the rot from the house. And it's and that I think what happens there is that really you can understand why people go there. There's anger, there's concern, there's hurt. There's the desire to build something better, but we are living in a moment right now where there is I call it the sort of the deconstructive itch. And I don't mean deconstruction in terms of I'm like losing my faith personally. I mean, we're in a time when there's a lot of energy and you can build a platform and get attention and you can begin doing a lot just by constantly critiquing what the people before us have done or have done wrong. I think one of the things we got to recognize is, did previous generations of evangelicals get some things wrong? Absolutely. It's like, you've inherited this house that you live in, and because you live in it, you see all the flaws in it. You see all the problems with it. You see the cracks in certain parts of the wall, or this part of the foundation is shoddy, or, this room really needs to be remodeled or whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, they gave you a house. And so one of the things I'm telling those who are more on the sort of blow it all up side of things is to say, you can blow up every home, but at the end of the day, we'll all be homeless. Like you got to build something at some level. You can't just bomb the rubble forever and expect there to be a sort of a culture that's made there. You've got to actually get to work building. So I think that temptation is really strong. I think it's really popular in our day, and we've got to resist it. And I'm assuming that the people on this call are people who want to be part of the solution. And to do that well, you need to recognize which inclination you have to be one who blows up everything or one who defends the indefensible and kind of minimizes stuff. And then you got to fight against that temptation with other people around you to where you're going to say, no, we're not going to throw out the Bible. We're going to dig deeper into the foundation of what it is we believe. What's the bedrock that this house is built on, and what needs to be changed and altered and adapted in this house to better reflect what God's intention is. And that's going to mean staring some evil straight in the face without excuse or justification, and with repentance and turning from it. And it's also going to require us to fortify those foundations in a way that's going to make people on the more progressive side uncomfortable, because it is easier to blow things up rather than to build.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that you mentioned in looking for strategies, looking for ways to do this, one of the keys is looking back into the past. You mentioned that earlier. So maybe an example, or what are some lessons that we can take from church history that can help us maybe come up with a strategy or come up with a course, or at least could give us hope for the future?
Yeah, I like to think of church history as more as a treasure box, less as a map. I'm always, there are some people, and you'll see this happen. There are Christians who get really enamored with a particular moment in church history, and it's like this golden era that if we could just get back to this, and they'll take aspects of church history that they find there, and they'll want to overlay it on our own times and say, if we just do all these things they did in this way, this is going to be the result. The reason that doesn't work is culturally we're not in the same moment. And so certain things that you could do in one season won't have the same effect or even the same meaning necessarily in another season. I'm not talking about the basics that are true of the church in every era. I'm just talking about specific strategic kind of things. So, I mean, there's a lot of people that let's just talk about the Southern Baptist tribe for a minute. So there are some in our convention who are like, if we could get back to the sort of revivalistic, walk the sawdust trail, altar calls, anxious bench kind of, preaching, evangelistic preaching from the Crusade era back to like Billy Sunday, back to like, like the D.L. Moody. Like if we just would recreate these evangelistic experiences, have revivals, like the way we used to with evangelists, the way that, then that's the way that we're going to see, awakening take place. So that's what we need. And again, I mean, there are particular methods and things that are powerful and have been used by the Lord over time, through time in different ways. But it's sort of like that's the golden era, the campfire revival songs, the tent meetings. This is what we need to do. There are others who are like, no, we need to be like the Puritans, back to the Reformational age and back to, if we could just get back to Geneva and everything was like, where we had this sort of, really deep Bible study and theology and a really deep personal piety and whatnot. And I mean, I'm one who's learned a lot from the Puritans, so you've kind of got the Charleston stream of Southern Baptist life and you've got the Sandy Creek stream. And I look at them like Grandpa Charles and Grandma Sandy, like I don't want to see them get divorced. And like 10 years ago, I was concerned that, there were these two streams were kind of diverging rather than coming together. But I mean, you can even go back further. Like I love the great tradition. I go back to, Augustine and Chrysostom and Irenaeus and Gregory of Nyssa and Gregory of Nazianzus and others. And I mean, like I go back to like older church fathers, but there are some that are like, I mean, they would just live in that sort of, early Christendom model. And then there are others that want to go back beyond that. My point is you can find a point in time where you've got some heroes of the faith and you can wind up pining for that time or taking some of the strategies of that time and then overlaying them directly on our time in a way that doesn't really help. I don't think you get a map from church history. I think what you do get is you get a box with tools and treasures that you can see what is going to be helpful in our day and age. So, or as C.S. Lewis talks about, you can let the clean sea breeze of the centuries kind of flow through your mind so that you just think more clearly. So there may be some things from the past that will be very useful today that you can pull from, but it's not like you're going to get just a sort of a downloadable map. If you just do all of these things, this is what will happen. Instead, it's going to be a little bit more of picking and choosing the elements that we as missionaries, thinking through mission in our own time are going to see as helpful. So that's the way I look at church history. It's this amazing place to go back to retrieve what you need for the task that you have today without trying to recreate or, repristinate some sort of past that you're trying to repeat.
Yeah, that's really, really good. So let's think of an example or is there an example that kind of comes to mind where the church was really in this tense moment and there was a desperate need for really something supernatural ultimately to happen to preserve the integrity and the orthodoxy of the church? Is there an example like that kind of comes to mind?
Oh, I mean, there's lots of examples I think we could look at. I mean, just off the top of my head, I think about some of the darker seasons in the UK, for example, during like the ministry of Charles Simeon. I mean, this was a guy who had people throwing stuff through the windows of his church when he was preaching. And yet during this sort of lull, this sort of dip in religiosity during that moment, that's the very time that God was raising up the Clapham sect that wound up putting an end to slavery, reforming the manners of England. I mean, that's William Wilberforce, Hannah More, and others who were, I mean, it's just that all that's happening at the same time. Or I think of, I did mention Francis of Assisi in one of the episodes of Reconstructing Faith, because he's sort of a proto reformer during a really, it was a time of deep and very pervasive corruption in the church. And I think what we learn from Francis is how to go about reforming the church through example, with at the same time never giving up on the church and having a deep love for the church. I'm concerned that a lot of times the most prophetic voices against the church sound very loveless, almost as if it's all about the church's failures and what it gets wrong, without a real sense of aching over the church's failures because of how much you love the church and how much you want the church to look like Jesus. Of course, we could go back to the Reformation time and the corruption then to see, the reformers and what the Lord brought out of that. Really, if you go back to the Great Awakening, the first Great Awakening, I mean, it happened at a time, people think of colonial America in the pre-colonial period or the pre-revolutionary period as if it's this, sort of wonder of religiosity. And it just was not. I think the stats show that only like 17% of the colonists in the 1730s or so belonged to any church. So, in any official capacity. So, I mean, it was a very unchurched time when suddenly you've got Jonathan Edwards and George Whitfield and others that are, suddenly the Lord is doing a real work that becomes widely influential. So again, and I mean, we could point now to things happening in other parts of the world around the globe, and just God's at work. So the question is, if you adopt this mindset of if everything is just declining and getting worse, then you're really most likely missing out on some of what God is always up to. There's always way more going on in a particular moment than we can see or even interpret. You need the perspective of history to be able to do that. And so I just encourage people to look back at church history and recognize there have been really dark moments. And the nice thing is, though, sometimes it's darkest right before the dawn comes. And so if you feel like this is one of those dark moments, well, then just wait, because, God's at work. The sun's going to come up.
Yeah, that's very, very good. And one of the things too, just kind of quickly, we talk about challenges that the church is facing internally, but there's also some more external threats to the church. One of those things is kind of like a rising tide of secularism that's just been taking place really over the last probably 50 plus years. But kind of now in the present, it kind of you look at Christianity and it can feel like, man, we do not have the arguments, or we don't have the intellect. We just are portrayed as kind of the backwoods sometimes, where there's no sort of intellect to what we believe. But really, you recently wrote an article that kind of put that on its head just a little bit. You use the example that the Christian tradition is a castle, not a cabin.
Yeah.
So just kind of tease that out a little bit.
Yeah, I think we'll be more likely to evangelize when we have confidence in the gospel, and when we have confidence that we actually do have really significant, meaningful answers to questions that people are asking. And I feel like at times Christians have a bit of an intellectual inferiority complex, where it's just like, whoa, how are, there's, big bad philosophers and, commentators and atheistic scientists and whatnot who have all of these arguments against the Christian faith. And we basically at some point run out of answers, throw up our hands and say, well, but at the end of the day, you just have to believe, it's a leap of faith, and you have to believe, as if basically there's this imposing castle of materialism, naturalistic philosophy that's out there, and we are in this little cabin with a little fireplace, feeling okay. It's leaking here and there, but we're here trying to convince people to come into. And I'm just like, no, that is the other way around. In fact, I mean, one of the most encouraging books I've read recently is from my friend Justin Brierley in the UK, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, where he's giving all sorts of examples of some of the smartest, most well-educated people in the world on all sorts of fronts. So science, philosophy, psychology, whatever it might be, who are coming around, historians, coming around to the fact that Christianity has so much to offer, that Christianity actually makes so much sense of the world, and not in all cases have they become Christians. In a lot of ways, they're sort of still on the outskirts. But the fact that they're recognizing that Christianity is a treasure trove of place, it's like they've discovered this castle and they can't believe that they're in it. Whereas we who think of ourselves in the cabin don't realize that we actually have that it's our castle that they're exploring. And so I think if you think of it that way, it's not that you have to have every answer that could possibly come up, every answer to every objection, or be like, not everyone has to be like a William Lane Craig or even Augustine or these great apologists of the Christian faith. But if you at least have explored the castle enough to know that there are resources there, you're going to engage with more, with some panache, with some enthusiasm, with this ebullient sense of joy, not sort of this cowering over in the corner, afraid that people aren't going to take you seriously. Some of the smartest people who have ever lived are Christians. I mean, just go back through the ages. Like some of the most towering intellects that are ever there are Christians. And we kind of assume this sort of, I think on the part of the world, this sort of patronizing Bill Maher kind of condescension. And I just think where we shouldn't accept that, and we should recognize, no, we have amazing resources at our fingertips, and I think we'll engage more. I think we'll engage better if we've got that sense of confidence in the castle that we've inherited.
Wow, that's great. One of the things, just to kind of wrap up with one final question, what are maybe some practical tips? Like kind of a lot of what we've talked about has been pretty high level sort of stuff, but what are just some practical tips that like a communicator, Christian communicator, Baptist communicator could maybe kind of take away from this on how to move forward and be a part of, like you said earlier, a part of the solution to the challenges that we're facing?
Well, I know communicators. I know you've got a report on conversations that are happening and debates that are going on and controversies and whatnot. But my encouragement would be, do whatever you can to lift up the most constructive voices you find. If we're living in an era where that deconstructive itch is really powerful, then one of the best things you can do to counter that is to consistently find people, search them out, find them, of people who are doing really constructive work in different areas where the church needs help, where the church needs rebuilding. Generally speaking, you're not going to find someone who's an expert on everything. But it's like I tell people, you've got to be willing to tackle one part of the wall. Maybe we can't do everything, but is there something that you can do? If you find what that is, then you'll have a sense of personal calling yourself. But if you can find other people who are doing really good work on other parts of the broken down wall that they're repairing, the more you can highlight voices like that, constructive voices like that, the better off we will be. Because right now we're living in an age where social media rewards hot takes, it rewards the loudest voices. The algorithm is set to constantly put people in front of you that are generally the more outrageous, often more critical people who are really good at tearing down, but really at the end of the day don't build anything. And so I think one of the ways that communicators can be one of the ways that we can do our job more effectively is just to constantly put before people constructive voices, and to gather people that are that are doing good constructive work. So I'd encourage that, and then I'd also say, for your own personal development and spiritual well-being, it's really good to stretch your mind a bit, and to make sure to kind of dip into the wells of church history, and to be in touch with Christians in other parts of the world, just to give you that kind of perspective that will go into the writing you do. It will come out in ways that you don't even recognize. It's not that you're going to some of these books or you're talking to some of these people because you've got a particular thing you want to do just now with it. it will, that perspective will come out in your overarching communication, reporting, all sorts of writing that you do, or speaking in other places. It'll come out in ways that you don't anticipate, and you'll be wiser for it. And the people who listen to you and learn from you will be wiser for it. And so I think the more we can encourage each other on in that kind of a task, the better job we do, and the healthier we will be as a convention.
You used a word there at the very end just about being wiser. And it does not take much reading in Proverbs and other wisdom literature of the Bible to realize, man, that's a desperate thing that we need. We need that. And so, Trevin, just thanks so much for taking the time to be with us. It's been great. I'm thankful for you and thankful for you jumping in here. I
Well,
hope
thanks
you
for giving me the opportunity to speak to everyone.
Well, we appreciate Trevin sharing with us and taking time out of his busy schedule. Brandon, I noticed your first few questions really did have a great deal of, seem to have a great deal of emotion with them that we all are feeling in this moment in Southern Baptist life. And I sense maybe even this what do we do next kind of feel, even some grieving over some of the things that have happened. So I would like to ask you, in terms of his response, did you find it reassuring?
Well, to a certain extent, yes. I mean, I only say to a certain extent because sometimes the challenges that we face can seem so daunting. But one of the things that it is definitely reassuring is just to recognize that the challenges we face, it's not the first time that the church has faced challenges. The Holy Spirit has delivered the church through several different difficult seasons in the life of Christianity. And so it's just really, really encouraging to sit back and to remember that, reflect on that, and recognize that when even things seem overwhelming in the present moment, man, God's had a bigger plan. He's writing a bigger story. And we have the opportunity to be a part of telling that story. And that part was definitely very, very encouraging.
You know, he has such a way with words, and I love the phrase that he used, the Christian faith is a castle, not a cabin. What did you find most insightful yourself or helpful from his response in regard to the rise of secularism and how we should respond to that rise as believers?
Yeah, one of the interesting things about this topic is that I kind of, coming out of college, I went to a secular university, and coming out of that, like I really felt these challenges to my faith, and really kind of walked out thinking, man, I just don't know that there's great answers. I didn't abandon my faith by any means, but it was really not until I actually went to seminary at New Orleans and just sat under the teaching of theologians and biblical scholars, and they just explained just the immense wealth of resources and the immense just the number of thoughtful people throughout the centuries who have thought about deep questions like the ones that we face today, and they've responded in articulate ways, and even up into the present. So many. Anytime someone comes to me with questions, if it's discipleship, small group, I always tell them, if you have a question, I can guarantee you someone's written a book length response to that question. I mean, there really is this extraordinary tradition that we're a part of, and even today, there's so many people who are wisely, carefully, thoughtfully, and faithfully answering some of life's most difficult questions.
So I do have one last question then, because that leads us to what we can do as communicators. And he mentioned a couple of things, such as highlighting those who are doing positive things, but also stretching our minds like you just talked about,
Yeah.
reading for some of these answers. So what do you think? Are we in maybe an opportune time as communicators? Is this a day where we really can make a difference?
Oh, I absolutely think we can make a difference. It's one of the fascinating things, as Trevin pointed out. It's so important to find those voices and to help share those voices. Give them a platform with your audiences. Let them know, hey, there's difficult questions out there. Go find the people who are biblically and faithfully responding to those questions, and give them a platform in your different spaces. That can be really, really helpful, and it can be really helpful to your audience if they're struggling with those questions, to actually find other people who are responding to those sorts of things. And in a lot of ways too, it's also just a challenge to us as communicators. We have a stewardship to seek out these things, to face these challenges ourselves, and to do some of the difficult reading sometimes if it takes that, and to find the people to have these conversations with. It's just it's a real challenge, and it's something that we need to take up as communicators. And it's an opportunity, like you said, it is an opportune time for us to play a key role in helping the church in this difficult season. We have a great stewardship and a great responsibility to take on that challenge ourselves.
And that's a good word. Thank you.
So next up, we have a presentation from Jason Thacker. Now, I could sit here and read Jason's curriculum vitae for hours, but you're gonna want to hear what he has to say. He has become, in the last few years, a really a leading voice, not just for Southern Baptists, but really in the evangelical world on the subject of Christianity, technology, faith, discipleship, and how all of these things interact and intersect, and especially in the area of artificial intelligence. In a lot of ways, I'd heard about artificial intelligence and TV, sci-fi, all that sort of stuff, but it wasn't until I started listening to Jason Thacker that I really realized what's out there on the horizon based off of his research and study in this area. It's been extensive. He's written several books on it, and I'm just really looking forward to sharing his presentation with our BCA audience.
Hi, my name is Jason Thacker, and I serve as an assistant professor of philosophy and ethics at Boyce College in Louisville, Kentucky, and also as a senior fellow in Christian ethics, as well as the director of the Research Institute at the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention. I'm really glad to be able to be with you all today to be talking about some really big issues, as well as some very interesting topics surrounding the age of AI and the future of the creative industry. First, as we get going, I just want to thank Brendan Elrod and the team at BCA for hosting this talk and for the invitation to be able to be with you all today. Really looking forward to a lot of the things we're going to talk about. When many of us think about artificial intelligence or AI, we often see one of two reactions. We see an idea of a lot of fear and anxiety surrounding this technology, how disruptive it is, how it's changing every single aspect of our society, or we see kind of a pure optimism, often unbridled optimism, a lot of excitement about this technology, its potential, and a lot of these future benefits. This excitement on one hand, as well as this fear on the other, is kind of understandable in many ways. There are a lot of exciting aspects with this technology, but also some fearful aspects of how it's going to upend and change certain industries. And even as late, we've had a lot of conversations about the creative industry and even the writing industry, communications in general, and how ChatGPT or generative AI systems more broadly may disrupt or change certain aspects of all of our jobs, or even to augment or to replace certain others. When we start to think about these kind of two typical reactions to artificial intelligence, I think it often boils down to, what do we think technology is? This kind of fundamental question that I often pose to my students at Boyce. I'll say, what is technology? And about 99% of the time I get various answers about examples of technology. But what I'm really getting at is getting at the core of what it is in its essence. What is technology? What is it in terms of, is it just merely a tool that we use, or is it something that's forming and shaping us as people? Is it something that we just choose to use for good or for ill, and so the tool itself is very neutral? Or is the tool either good or bad, or is it neutral in itself but still shaping and forming us in particular ways? Our answer to that question of what is technology, I think, is vitally important as we step into a lot of these debates, a lot of the conversations, not only surrounding technology in general, but also in terms of artificial intelligence. Whether we hold to more of a tool-based view, or we hold to this kind of more expansive view of technology, I think it's helpful for us to see that these tools aren't neutral. These tools are very much shaping us, informing us. The way I like to talk about it is that these technologies, particularly AI, are actually causing us it's changing our view, our perception of who God is, who we are as human beings, as well as the world around us. When we think about this idea and this question of, is technology just merely a neutral tool, or is it something that's forming and shaping us, it always reminds me of the old adage, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. For most of us, that's kind of an age-old adage. It kind of makes a lot of sense. When you pick up a hammer, it's designed to hit things. And I have two boys. I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old boy. And when they were a little bit younger, we had this little yellow wooden toolbox in our house full of toy tools, and there was a little yellow hammer. And I can just say, as a dad and from experience, that when you do have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, including your brother's head, the wall, your foot, other toys. Because why? When my son picked up that hammer, it was designed to hit things. That was its intention. That was its design. Media theorist Neil Postman kind of extends this truism. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And he says, to a person with a pencil, everything looks like a sentence. To a person with a TV camera, everything looks like an image. To a person with a computer, everything looks like data. One of my friends, Jacob Schatzer, who teaches at Union University in Jackson, Tennessee, updates this adage, and he says that when you have a smartphone with a camera, everything looks like a status update. I think for those of us who serve in the creative industry or are impacted and shaped by the industry itself, it's high time for us to slow down to think about what are these technologies, what about these mediums might be shaping our message, shaping the things we're seeking to communicate, and how do we navigate a lot of the challenges as well as a lot of the opportunities before us, especially in this age of artificial intelligence. It's really easy for us, I think, to want to move fast and break things, to kind of conjure the old Silicon Valley mantra of wait and see, is this really a problem? Let's just move forward with innovation for innovation's sake. But Christian wisdom, the Christian ethic, and really the nature of the Christian life causes us to slow down, to cultivate wisdom over efficiency and convenience. Rather than just move fast and break things, we slow down to ask the big questions, not only what is this technology, how is it shaping and forming me, as well as how do we navigate these things centered on the nature of the Christian ethic and loving God and loving our neighbor as ourselves. I think that we often fail to see how our tools and our technologies and even the new mediums of the day, how they're shaping us, how they're shaping our view of the world, how they're shaping our view of God, ourselves, as well as the world around us. One of the things that I think is most helpful for Christians when we think about these technologies, as we slow down to see that technology is not just merely a tool that we can use for good or for ill. It's not valueless, it's not neutral in that sense, but it's something that's deeply altering and shaping every single aspect of our life. And that will shape, obviously, our work as well. Until recently, when most people thought about artificial intelligence, our minds would be kind of enamored with sci-fi movie plots and silver screen Hollywood thrillers. We would think about how the robots are going to take over. But in many ways, we have been utilizing artificial intelligence every single day for a number of years, whether we realize it or not. It wasn't just last November in terms of the release of ChatGPT that we started to talk about artificial intelligence, but it really was something that we've been using for a long time, whether it's our Siri or Google, whether it's our communication platforms, whether it's a lot of the tools that we use every single day that are smart tools or smart techniques. We are surrounded by these gadgets, these tools that utilize artificial intelligence to make our lives more convenient, better, faster, easier, but often have intended but also unintended effects on how they shape us as people. But what's really interesting is when we approach a lot of these questions about artificial intelligence today, many of us think that we're facing novel and new questions. But it's my contention that when we slow down and consider these questions in light of Christian wisdom, we actually realize that many of the questions that we're facing today at their fundamental level are actually questions that we've always asked as humanity, just being asked in light of some new opportunities. And first and foremost, I think one of the biggest questions that we're asking, especially today, surrounding artificial intelligence, is this question of what does it mean to be human? But before we can really grasp how these tools are shaping and forming us as well as our industry, we have to slow down and say, well, what is artificial intelligence in the first place? Simply put, artificial intelligence is non-biological intelligence, or the ability of a machine to perform a human-like task. And what that means is that whether it's processing vast amounts of data, making decisions based on that data and various inputs, simulating various human behaviors like communication, complex decision making, even some level of creativity, including writing, art, audio, and film, these technologies are revolutionizing our society. We have entered into what I like to call the age of AI, the age of artificial intelligence, where this tool is shaping every single aspect of our society, whether we realize it or not. One of the most ironic things I think about the age of AI that we live in is this idea that we often conjure and question about the what these technologies are and what they may become. We often think about the ways that these tools are becoming human-like and challenging our status as human beings. And so we often seek to humanize these machines. At the same time, we dehumanize ourselves. When we think about this from a Christian perspective, we realize that we often seek to humanize these machines, giving them names and titles and he and she, and we start to question about the availability, the use, the distribution of these tools, the future of what these tools may bring. And we think about them in very human terms because these technologies are very much challenging our perception of what does it mean to be human. On the flip side of this kind of humanizing our machine, we also seek, and we in many ways dehumanize ourselves, seeing ourselves as nothing but merely a machine. And if we're just merely a machine, then yes, maybe these tools can rival us in terms of humanity. They can actually challenge and fundamentally kind of alter and change various aspects of our society. But when I think we step back from, at least from a Christian perspective, and think about the nature of what does it mean to be human as an image bearer of the Almighty God, that's not based on the things we do, but it's actually based on who we are, the status as the image bearer of the Almighty God, I think that can fundamentally kind of change the script about the ways that Christians approach and the ways that we seek to navigate a lot of these challenges and these big questions that are pressing on our industry today. AI is something that we're using every single day, whether we realize it or not. And I think it's high time for us as Christians to slow down and start to ask some of these fundamental questions of what is technology, what is artificial intelligence, and what is a proper Christian framework in response to a lot of the pressing challenges as well as the opportunities before us. It always reminds me of a quote from the famed computer scientist and futurist Ray Kurzweil. Kurzweil writes, he said, "What if all of our AI systems decided to go on strike tomorrow," kind of conjuring these futuristic sci-fi kind of Hollywood plots of these machines kind of rising up over us. He said that our civilization would be crippled. We couldn't get money from our bank, and indeed, all of our society, our money would even disappear. Communication, transportation, manufacturing would all grind to a halt. The reality is that we're utilizing these technologies every single day, whether we realize it or not. And as I said earlier, we often feel that a lot of the challenges that we're facing today, a lot of the seemingly novel ethical questions and moral concerns are somehow new. But at their fundamental level, they're challenging some of these fundamental ideas of who is God, what does it mean to be human, and how are we called to live in this world around us. And a lot of this kind of a lot of it started, especially last November, with the public release of OpenAI's ChatGPT system for a generative AI chatbot from OpenAI that launched last November of 2022. This system really very quickly, in about 5 or 6 days after release, gained over 1 million users, and to date has well over 100 million users. This technology is very interesting, not only because a lot of the media hype that's surrounding, but a lot of the real big pressing questions of artificial intelligence. As we already stated earlier, we've long been utilizing these tools, whether we realize it or not. But there was something that fundamentally shifted, something that fundamentally changed in the public awareness and consciousness surrounding these tools and how they're shaping and forming us as people. If you haven't played around with the system, it's actually pretty fascinating, a lot of the things that it can do, but also a lot of the limitations. There's a bit of a moral panic surrounding artificial intelligence, surrounding a lot of the nature of work, especially in the creative industry and the communications industry, because for a long while we thought that AI and technology and automation would take over, especially kind of mundane, kind of blue collar type of work, very kind of predictive type of work. But it's really interesting how it's actually taking over other types of what we thought at one time would be, quote, safer jobs in terms of writing and creativity and art and various media production. The reality is that it's affecting all of our work in some ways in very small, but also in very, very large ways. And so the question that I want to ask is, as an ethicist and philosopher, is why the alarm and why now? I think one of the most fascinating aspects of this current fixation on these technologies actually boils down to that question of what does it mean to be human? It's fundamentally, these technologies are fundamentally challenging a lot of the assumptions of what we thought it meant to be human. As Christians, when we say, what does it mean to be human? We often respond rightfully with Genesis 1:26 through 28, when we read, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, male and female, he created them. This sense that we're image bearers of the Almighty God, that we hold this status, is very biblical, and it's a central biblical theme that permeates every single aspect of Scripture. But often when we say, well, what does that mean? We step back and say, well, what is the image of God, or what does it truly mean to be human? We often give a very capacity or kind of attribute-based response. We say something like, well, it's our intellect, it's our reason, it's our ability to have relationships, it's our capacity to even represent God. And one of the things I want to say is that these things are very much true. Humans do have high level of reason and rationality and intellect. We often have a very high capacity for relationships with God and with others, and also the ability to represent God, to functionally represent, to perform certain jobs, and to model his reign and rule as his vice regents here on earth. But some of the challenges to these views is, what if a human doesn't live up to these certain capacities or these attributes? What if they don't even have the ability of those things? When we start to slow down and think about what does it mean to be human, I think it's easy today for many of us to kind of base human dignity, value, and worth on the things we do and the things that we model and the capacities we have, rather than who we are. This status of what it means to be the image of God, this ontological status, is that simply we are a biological human. That is what makes us unique. That is what makes us exceptional. That is what stands us apart from the rest of creation, is that God made us. This status, this inalterable, unchanging status that God has uniquely bestowed on us into humanity, is not based on the things we do, but it's actually based on who we are as image bearers of the Almighty God. When we start to think about this, and it's very helpful when we think about how to navigate a lot of the questions surrounding artificial intelligence, is this central theme of human dignity. We see it from the very first pages of Scripture all the way through as a central theme, that God has set us apart, that God has called us out, that God has called us into a relationship with himself because he's made us in his very image, and he calls us to live in light of that image. And by default, that image gives us an inherent dignity, a value, a worth, but also a destiny of where we're going and who we're becoming. This concept of loving God and loving our neighbors ourselves, that's really the summation of the Christian ethic in Jesus' own words of Matthew 22, verses 37 through 39, to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbors ourselves. In many ways is central, not only a call on human beings specifically to love God and love neighbor as a moral agent, morally accountable, morally responsible to him as his image bearers, but also calling us to look outside of ourselves, to realize that it isn't the things we do per se, but it's actually who we are, and that fundamentally shapes every single aspect of the human life, every single aspect of the Christian life in particular, as we seek to harness all things, including technology and even artificial intelligence, for the love of God and the love of neighbor. And part of that love of neighbor is recognizing the dignity and the value and the worth that's inherent in every single human being, not based on the things they do, but based on who they are. So when we start to think a lot about the challenges surrounding generative AI and these systems that have a lot of benefits, but also a lot of peril, we should think through that these technologies are not just merely a tool that we use for good or for ill, but actually are not even value neutral. They're shaping, they're forming us in particular ways, causing us to see God, but even to see those around us in our society in very distinct ways, often in very utilitarian ways, to say that their value, their dignity, and their worth is based on the things they do rather than who they are. When we start to think about the ways that generative AI, in particular these systems in terms of creativity in the creative industry, I think it's very fundamental to slow down and say, well, what really is creative? What does it really mean to create something? We don't create like God creates. We know from Scripture that God created ex nihilo, meaning from nothing, that he is the creator, we're the creature. He created everything from nothing. We create from what he has given us. And so in some ways, there is this sense that we create like God creates. We animate things with new meaning, and we communicate and we engage as we seek to communicate his message of hope and salvation to the world around us. But in some other ways, that we don't actually create from nothing. We don't create original things in some ways as well, because God creates ex nihilo. We create from what he has made. We create to reflect him, to magnify him, and to honor him as we seek to love him and to love our neighbors ourselves. When we start to think about the nature of AI and generative AI in particular in the creative industry, I think it's helpful for us to have a paradigm of this idea of augmentation versus substitution. One of the big challenges, one of the big questions that we're asking today about these technologies is how can they be harnessed to help to augment and to come alongside and to magnify human dignity and value and worth rather than come alongside to substitute or to replace. When we start to think about this in terms of our work, when we start to think about this in terms of the applications of our work and how we seek to communicate with others, I think it's helpful for us to keep this paradigm that these tools should be augmenting, they should be coming alongside and magnifying the image bearers of the Almighty God, that infinite value, dignity, and worth, rather than seeking to substitute or replace. This focus on humanity and humans creating content and these tools coming alongside to augment that process, I think can be a very helpful tool. It can speed up various processes. It can help us to think. It can help us to really shine a light on what humans do uniquely and what is human value, dignity, and worth as rooted in the image of God. It's interesting throughout society, we see this push for authenticity, we see this push for human connectivity, and I found like it's really interesting in terms of how we navigate these questions in the creative industry, because I think many of the people engaging our messaging, engaging the communication efforts that we're putting forth, want to know that someone is authentically human. We want to see that authentic human communication. So one of the big questions that I think I would pose to you today, as well as to myself, is how is the work you're doing seeking to be authentic and create authentic relationships and community with other people and to truly connect with them rather than just seeing them as a cog in a wheel or part of a machine just in this terms of efficiency and convenience. How are the things we're doing showing that we're uniquely human and connecting with people if these machines can just do the exact same thing? It always reminds me of the Christian author Hannah Anderson right after ChatGPT released, and there was a lot of fervor, a lot of questions and hype surrounding how this may even upend the publishing industry in general. She said that for her, it didn't actually scare her as much as it was a challenge to say, how are the things I'm doing? Is the writing I'm producing, and this can be extended to audio and video and creative, are the things I'm doing just kind of boilerplate? Are they predictive? Are they basic? Or is there something uniquely human about them in terms of the way I communicate and the message that I'm seeking to communicate? These tools may not be a challenge to our jobs as much as cause us to be better, to do a better job, to make sure that the things we're producing, the things that we're putting forth can't be reproduced so easily by a machine. When we start to think about the fair and ethical use of these things, there's another kind of contour to a lot of the questions surrounding artificial intelligence and generative AI. For example, recently a Reuters story came out to talk about the ChatGPT producing books and selling them on Amazon's Kindle store. They said using this software, which can generate various blocks of text from very simple prompts, a man created a 30-page illustrated children's ebook in the matter of hours and immediately listed it for sale in the Kindle store. Now, he's not raking in the money, but if you can produce these things at a scale, it's something that you can actually make a good bit of money on. And interesting, according to the story, there were over 200 ebooks in Amazon's Kindle store as of mid-February, listing ChatGPT as one of the authors or the co-authors of the text, including how to write and create content utilizing ChatGPT, the power of homework, as well as a poetry collection called Echoes of the Universe. And these numbers continue to rise every single day, and there's even a new subgenre on Amazon of books about using ChatGPT or written entirely by ChatGPT. This raises a lot of really interesting questions, not only of that human uniqueness and creativity, but also the sense of the fair and ethical use of these applications that have long plagued our industry in terms of the prevalence of ghostwriting, the using other ideas, and even plagiarism itself. And while I'm an ethicist and a philosopher, I'm not a lawyer, I do think it raises some really interesting questions about copyright and how do we utilize these things and who gets credit for these things. And that sense of who is not something that we can attribute to a machine. A machine is something, and we are someone, according to the German philosopher Robert Spemann, that we are someone, we are a person, we are a subject versus a machine that is an object. So I think that if we take that kind of human-centric, human dignity approach to all of these questions, it will help us to navigate, to put in the type of guardrails that we need as Christians to navigate these things, to realize that these technologies aren't neutral. They're shaping and forming us as people. They're shaping and forming how we view God, how we view ourselves, as well as the world around us. And also, one of the guardrails that we can keep in mind is the centrality of human dignity, making sure that we're seeking to augment and not to substitute or replace. Overall, one of the big kind of takeaways that I want you to have today is to realize that there are limitations to these systems and that we can't overly rely upon them. They are not perfect. They are getting better each and every day, but we should seek as Christians to harness these technologies, to harness these tools, including artificial intelligence, for the love of God and for the love of neighbor. One of the temptations that we will face is to rush kind of headlong into a lot of the innovation for innovation's sake, to say, really, is this a problem? Shouldn't we, and rather than slowing down to ask some of those fundamental questions about how do we seek to utilize these things for the love of God and love of neighbor. One of the temptations when faced with a lot of the challenging ethical and complex kind of ethical questions of technology is to rush into a position of full adoption or full rejection. But I think that for Christians, we should seek to cultivate a sense of wisdom that's really at the center of the Christian moral tradition that causes us to slow down, to ask the big questions, to think deeply about the nature of these tools, as well as the myriad of their uses. So as we wrap up today, I think one of the key takeaways from this wisdom tradition, this wisdom nature to the Christian ethic, is to keep human dignity the very center of all of the uses of our technology, including AI. This question of should we do something versus just can we is really the question of ethics. Yes, we can do it, but should we do it? You see that idea of slowing down to ask that question of should. That's very much at the core of the wisdom tradition, the core of the Christian ethical tradition of slowing down to ask, should we do something rather than just can we? Here it reminds me of Jesus' own words that we read in Matthew 22, verses 37 through 39 that we've already talked about, that we are to love the Lord our God with our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and we are to love our neighbors ourselves. Part of that loving our neighbors ourselves is recognizing the dignity and the value and worth of every single human being is created in the very image of God, and reminding us of who God is, how he has set us apart, how he is the creator, we are the creature, he is infinite and we are finite. As we think through technology's continued influence throughout all of our society, throughout all of our lives, I think we need to be, as Christians, reminded that we have a steadfast hope and we have a robust ethic to help us navigate the challenges of these days from a place of hope, from a place of faith, rather than a place of debilitating pessimism or even this unbridled optimism that's so characteristic of our day. In this age of AI, the Christian ethic calls us to live in a particular way of loving God and loving our neighbors ourselves, recognizing the value and the worth and the dignity of every single human being. So my challenge to you as communicators, as one seeking to communicate these message of hope and peace and faith that we find in the gospel of Jesus Christ, that we see permeated throughout the scriptures, is how are the ways that you're utilizing these technologies, ways you're thinking about utilizing them, helping you to love God and to love your neighbors yourself and to magnify that ethic throughout every single aspect of our society. I hope that this conversation is just a first among many that you and your teams will have to start thinking about the contours about what is a uniquely Christian approach to these technologies. And I think one of the facets of that should be this kind of centrality and this focus on the image of God and human dignity, to be reminding people that their worth and their value is not based on the things they do, but it's based on who they are in light of who God is and how he calls us to live in light of that. Overall, we have a steadfast hope, even in the midst of uncertain times, even in the midst of pressing and challenging questions, because we know that God is sovereign, that he is good, that all of humanity is created in his image, and nothing will ever be able to truly supplant that, because it isn't based on the things we do, but it's based on who we are. And in light of that truth, in light of that hope, I think that we should be able to slow down to ask the big questions of technology, how it's forming and shaping us as people, how it's changing our perception of God, ourselves as human beings, as well as the world around us, to ask these big questions, but do so in the light of the hope and the peace and grace that we find in Jesus Christ. Thank you.
Man, I told you that this was going to be a presentation to look forward to, and hopefully you see that I wasn't lying. So it's just, Jason just has so much insight in this area, and so grateful that we have the opportunity to learn from him. And AI is certainly, it's one of those things that has caused me a lot of concern, just personally and professionally. But Marilyn, how about you?
Yeah, it is here. It's not something in the future. It's already here, and I think we probably don't realize how much, but anything that's smart is got something in there that is watching and knowing what we do, and I guess that's the artificial intelligence. I liked what he said. I believe that this goes to the heart of worldview and who we are as humans, that this is a question that is at the heart of the issue today. So it is important that we look at artificial intelligence and kind of know what's going on. But, John Lennox, and I know you know that name,
Yeah.
he is a emeritus professor of mathematics at Oxford University, and just a fabulous voice for the Christian faith. And he knows math, he knows science, and he always reminds us that this shouldn't be something that we're afraid of. It should be something that we are aware of and understand. And he distinguishes between narrow AI and more general AI. And the narrow is what we are getting today, the things that are helping us. And so he says, it is artificial. Don't forget, it is artificial.
Yeah.
That it's still humans writing the programs. The narrow AI, like we're all used to, chat box, smartphones, this type of thing, these are, they do one task. But John Lennox made this point. He said that, there's still this question. You can have a computer or AI drive a car, but how do you write an ethics program for that car where it can make the decisions as to whether to pull over to the side of the road and help someone or whatever. So it's a very fascinating subject.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if I had the time, I would read everything John Lennox has ever written, but I don't have the time to do that. He's written just far too much and far too many things. He's written on so many different topics. But one of the things we'll do, absolutely, is share some of these resources and a set of show notes that we'll present, and just some things that will really kind of help you go deeper on some of the topics that we've covered in today's workshop.
I heard a friend today talk about talking to a chat box, and he asked it to write an article, because this is what we're concerned about.
Right.
And he said that when he first saw the article, it seemed just very well done, had these quotes that were just perfect. But he said as he began to investigate it, the quotes were fake. And so he said, can you send me a link? He said this to the chat box. And he did. The chat box did, but it was a fake. So I think, like John Lennox said, it is artificial. And the human mind and the human creative spirit will always be needed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. All right, well, this was just such a great time together at our fall forum. One of the things you know what, Marilyn, I don't even know if I mentioned this, but this is actually the 10th Fall Forum. We're celebrating 10 years of the Fall Forum. That would have been a great thing to have discussed at the very beginning, but hey, we saved the best for last, and just celebrating that, recognizing that, we just do it right here at the very end. But no, it's been such a sweet time, such a great time together. Hopefully you have learned as much as I have just listening to these ladies and gentlemen, of just how incredible the insight that they have and the depth of the wisdom that they bring to the table is just, I'm always humbled whenever I have the opportunity to just interact and listen with their resources and the material. And I'm glad that they were able to come and serve us for this forum. And similar to the Fall Forum, though, we've got something big to look forward to for the spring. If you're a new member, or if you've not been to BCA's annual workshop that takes place in the spring, we've got a wonderful event to look forward to. It's the International Mission Board is actually going to host us in Richmond, and they're prepared to go all out, as you will see from this promo video that they've put together.
Hello, Baptist Communicators Association. My name is Ed Hirelko. I'm the International Mission Board's Vice President for Marketing and Communications, or as we call it, MARCOM. We're excited to announce that next year's BCA annual conference will be meeting right here in the IMB's hometown of Richmond, Virginia, where for 178 years, we've been sending missionaries equipped with the good news of Jesus Christ to the nations. Our global Marcom team works to share how the gospel is transforming lives all around the world. Some of our team is here in Richmond and some of our team lives abroad, but I've asked a few of them to share what they love most about living in or visiting Richmond.
My favorite thing about Richmond is the coffee scene. I can spend hours caffeinating in Blanchard's or Urban Farmhouse or Ironclad.
I love spending time outside somewhere less hot.
One of my favorite things about Richmond is that it's a very active city. There's some awesome trails around the river and tons of other sports, so if you love doing things outside, you'll love Richmond.
My favorite thing about Richmond are all the street murals that you can go and tour. The arts and culture scene here is lively.
I love the old cobblestone streets and the history.
One of my favorite things about Richmond is how close you are to everything. There's a lot you can do downtown, but if you want to get away and go to the mountains or to the beach, it's pretty quick.
I love the springtime here in Richmond, and I love being able to be in parks, walking in the woods. There's beautiful parts here that are wonderful to explore.
My favorite thing about Richmond is the neighborhoods, and there's so many festivals and parks. Just walking around is a treat every season of the year.
Richmond is an amazing foodie town with loads of independent restaurants. If you decide to go to a chain restaurant while you're at BCA, you will be banned from BCA for life.
There's a lot to see, do, learn, and eat here in Richmond. We're excited to welcome BCA to Richmond in spring of 2024.
Well, Brandon, thanks again for all your hard work, and we really appreciate our speakers, and I think this has been a great time together, and we are looking forward to the spring in our workshop. So please join us for that. Make your plans for that. You won't regret it, and I think it'll be a beautiful time together. Also, stay tuned for the Student Award Program that's coming up as soon as we finish here, and we do wish all of you the very best as you write, produce, and do your videos and your pictures, that this next year will be a great year for you and for the kingdom of God. So do come be a part of us. We want to get to know you better, and we'll see you then.